Welcome to Wood and Iron, the podcast for loggers by loggers. We dig into the real stories, hard-earned lessons, and iron-sharpened wisdom that keep the wood industry moving. I'm Blake Manley with the Western Forestry and Conservation Association.
And I'm Jared Schrader with the Wisconsin Forestry Center. Together, we bring you the voices of the people who live and breathe timber. From the forest floor to the mill yard door, from chainsaws to forwarders, we're talking shop, celebrating the craft and tackling the issues shaping forestry today.
So grab your coffee, fire up your equipment, and settle in. This is Wood and Iron. Let's get to work. Big thanks today for our sponsor, Manly Jobs, promotional educational material for all groups. Welcome, everybody, to this episode. We're so excited today because we have a guest that's going to talk about, the business of being a logger, some of the details of how he got into it, the challenges that exist. And it's a true honor to have an Idaho logger here. As you know, I'm from Idaho. Love that state, love the forest there. This guy's born, raised, his blood runs Idaho, and it shows every time we talk. So without further ado, hey, Jody, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
So, Jody, I guess one of our main questions we want to ask today is kind of how did you get started in logging, and, maybe tell that story a little bit.
Well, I guess it kind of goes way back to 1986 when I was a freshman in high school. Me and a buddy of mine were driving around town looking for a job. And so we come up to this shop just out of St. Mary's, and the guy in a coveralls and little mechanic's hat, he was running around there, and Fred Gunther was his name. Owned Two Rivers Logging. Took our names down and left, and then, I don't know, weekend come up there, and I got a phone call from him. He wanted some help at the shop, so I went up to the shop, and, I didn't know much of anything, being a, 14, 15-year-old kid, single parent home. So he kind of took me in and showed me how to mechanic and showed me some pretty good work ethic, which I had some work ethic from my grandparents. But anyway, just kind of evolved around the, I guess, not Idaho, kind of a nut buster shop, person, floor sweeper, kind of clean up, grease monkey kind of. Just done that through high school, and he had logging trucks, and he had a couple line machine that had grapples on them for loading logs and piling brush. And I'd go out and hang out with him on the weekend and kind of see how things run. And any chance I got, I jumped on a piece of equipment with him, and he kind of taught me how to run equipment. And it just kind of evolved from there. Graduated high school, kind of one of them types of things. You're a young kid and you think you know everything. So him and I kind of went nose to nose and kind of jumped to another company and started hauling logs for a little while, hauled logs, and kind of, decided, well, that really wasn't what I wanted to do. So I went back to work for Fred again. And at that time, he'd kind of been into some demolition things, tearing down a few mills and doing different things. And he had some end dumps. So we done some rocking and just kind of an all around, pretty broad perspective of things to do, from truck driving to loading trucks to loading rock to running a front end loader to a forklift, just kind of got into the shop end of it first, and then kind of dabbled into the, like I said, the trucking. And then
Jody, that was back though when you didn't need every single certification that lives in order to jump in and start doing some of that stuff, right? So was it a little easier, do you feel like, than it is today?
Oh yeah. Oh, tremendously a heck of a lot easier. Back then, I think the Idaho law back then, you could get your chauffeur's license at 18. You just studied for the test, went down, took the test, and passed it, and you could start driving a truck. And that's what I done. And then they kind of grandfathered that into the CDL later on. But as far as running the equipment, it was just like, that's how you learned as a young individual, young adult or young kid. You just hung around those types of things and was able to pick up on how it worked, how it maneuvered, how to operate it, how to work the thing slow and not jerky. And then pretty soon that speed comes later. If you were smooth and fluent, as you started progressing, then that speed would come. And then pretty soon, you were, kicking it with the big dogs and doing just as good as an adult would.
Yeah. Jared, don't you agree? Like, we struggle getting kids like Jody, 1986 Jody. We struggle right now because there is so many hoops to jump through. I'm not saying that we don't jump through them, but you've been in the classroom, getting those type of kids interested is difficult, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's not only the difficulty of getting them the idea of wanting to go into that field, but now I think it's even harder to, go down, your main street and find a place that's going to be hiring that can give the students that kind of experience. So now it's a little bit more difficult, I think, for students to know, who do I ask to get into this, and how do I even know I want to get into this?
And then Jody, from the owner's point of view, that 18-year-old kid that has zero experience and we haven't allowed them to touch anything fun for the 4 years between 14 and 18, right? Um, Hard on you as the owner, right?
Tremendously, because you know what it takes when you tried to break in on a piece of equipment, how much stuff you broke. And then, of course, you're starting to look at things and like, hey, whoa, don't do that because this is going to happen. You have to be right there with them if you're going to do that. And it takes a lot of time and effort. It takes your time away to oversee them so that they don't break anything, catastrophic and things like that. So it's a tough deal, and some kids get it, a lot of them don't. I think, like myself, for instance, I feel that I kind of pick up on a lot of stuff, a lot of different pieces of equipment pretty easily. I noticed my son has gotten that trait, and he can jump on anything, and just within a few minutes he's doing fairly good at it. But
Yeah.
there again, it's kind of got to be in your blood. You kind of got to have that interest in things like that. To me, that's the problem that we have, is these kids are not exposed to the opportunities that are out there. And so that's why, I'm pretty adamant about this Live in the Woods show that we had last year that we put together, Blake and I, and a lot. I can't tell you how many volunteers come together to make that thing happen. And I think we had a total 500-ish kids that went through there, 250 of St. Mary's students the first day, and 250 of, outside districts come there. But, it was phenomenal. And, to me, if we've reached one or two kids out of that 500, we've done something, to try and get them interested in the workforce or into the timber industry.
Can you guys just take a second to expand on what that event was a little bit more?
Yeah. So Jody had this harebrained idea about, I don't know, a year ago ish, this fall, to try and get kids into the woods and to see the occupation, mostly with logging, right? We expanded it to forest products, the whole sector, but mostly with logging. And it's hard to get an individual school up to a job. So we said, okay, there's this thing that they do at the Pacific Logging Congress over on the west side. It's called Live in the Woods. And they bring young people out to the woods to their Live in the Woods show, and they actually walk them through and show them as the operation's actually happening. Right now, it's behind fences. It's a long ways between things, and they've been doing it really great. But they do it every 4 years, and it moves locations up and down the West Coast. And so, what Jody and I said is, why can't we do that in Idaho? Why can't we have something here? Now, I guess one of the things we missed is Jody not only owns Hendrickx Logging, but he's also on the school board at St. Mary's School District, and he's the vice president of the Loggers Association here in Idaho. And so there's a lot of connectivity between, what Jody does, not just as Logger Jody, but that bigger, expansive look. So when we came together, we said, okay, we need to do something. And so we started planning how we can bring all the local schools in this entire region to a location and walk them through a day in the life of a logger, so to speak. So we called it the Live in the Woods. It wasn't live this past spring when we did it. We didn't have them actually cutting down trees, but we did have it as though we just shut down operation. All the operators were there. And so then the students would start with the buncher, cutting what it took to cut it, skid it, process, load. And then in the center of our area that we were using it at, there's a great YouTube video on the Manly Jobs YouTube page that does it shows it a little bit though. It was a beautiful day. In the middle, we had all the manufacturers. So Bennett Lumber, mostly a stud mill. Well, they do an everything mill. Potlatch Deltic was there with veneer. We had IFG, Idaho Forest Group. We had all these different people there that kind of is the not logger and not foresters, but everything else in between. Les Schwab was there for changing tires. So we kind of had that in the middle. And then at the end, theoretically, at the end, we had tree planting because it kind of completes the cycle. And so that day or those 2 days, we planted almost 500 trees. Every kid got to plant a tree that kind of showed, okay, we're harvesting, it gets manufactured into a product, and then we're replanting at the end.
Yeah, so here in Wisconsin, we've got something similar to that. Great Lakes Timber Producers Association puts on what's called log-a-load events. And so they will basically log on a school forest and make an event out of it so that school district can come in and learn a lot more about the logging process. I brought our Ponzi harvest simulator there so students can see what it's like to actually sit in the cab of the machine they just got to watch operate. So very similar to that.
Awesome. Jody, did I miss anything there?
No, I think, I guess kind of the icing on the cake was Thursday when we done there. We had EMS there. We actually had Life Flight helicopter come in and sit down, and then we're connected with another long line rescue helicopter out of Kalispell, Montana. Two Bear Air, I believe, is what it is. And so they will fly throughout the state of Idaho for us to be able to pick a person out of the woods with the long line and then transfer them to the Life Flight helicopter to get them to the hospital. I actually got that connection started, I don't know if it was 2016 or 15 or somewhere there, but I had an individual, my Sawyer got pitched down the hill, 70 feet. He flew about 30 feet in the air and broke his femur in two places. Anyway, so and Idaho's unique that way. We have a radio or a system down in Boise State Com that we are able to call down there. If it's a logging accident, we take priority. And so they're able to get that helicopter dispatched to our landing zone, which we pre-register as we starting our job. We have a helicopter landing spot. And then you call back and request a long line helicopter. So Fairchild Air Force Base is in Spokane, and I thought that that's where that long line was coming from. And when I went and got the nurses out of the helicopter and we were packing the litter and stuff down to the guy, he told me this helicopter was coming out of Kalispell. And I'm like, oh, cool. All right. So then he started telling me about Two Bear Air. And I said, well, who funds this thing? Because I got a neighbor that had a helicopter and I knew stuff wasn't cheap. And he said, oh, the guy from Google, everybody's is volunteer and everything. And I'm like, well, the helicopter isn't cheap. But anyway, so the guy from Google, I think he lives on, I'm not sure what lake is up there by Kalispell, but anyway, on the west side of it. Anyway, so, that was pretty significant with the kids. I don't think a lot of the kids realize the access that we have. And of course, logging's dangerous and a dangerous sport, but from the time that accident happened in the morning, I think, and I was up the Coeur d'Alene River, 60 miles, which as a crow fly would probably be from Coeur d'Alene. I don't know if it'd be maybe 60, 70 miles ish, if that. But anyway, from the time that accident happened to where he was sitting at KMC in Coeur d'Alene was 2.5 hours.
As we talk about the evolution of logging, I started in 99. It's so much safer, period. But then we've done things like this that now, especially in the state of Idaho, and I think that's very unique to Idaho. We've had this conversation before. It's very unique. You can grab your radio, boom, you're on state comm. And like you said, in 2 hours, they're at the hospital. Hell, I've been on accidents before where it's not, we're not even to the truck in 2 hours.
Yeah.
So really a great kind of evolution of the industry, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. It's by far, because I mean, if you get cut with a saw, or I mean, a guy gets hit, or you break an arm or break a leg, or whatever happens, you've got that access. And I realize, times of the year that into the winter, they can't fly. The ceiling's too low for them. But then, so with that said, Statecom is able to dispatch the closest ambulance to us right away. And they really cautious us about calling 911, because 911, you have to go all through all the channels to get there, and they might dispatch an ambulance from 2 or 3 cities away from you, when the one is right there close, and they skip over it. So that's kind of one of the advantages of having Statecom and have this program with them for the loggers in Idaho.
Yeah, it's so great. Hey, Jody, why don't you kind of talk about why you stuck with it? Because let's be honest, being a logger is not easy. That's where I come from. My dad's a logger. My little brother's a logger. I was a logger for a lot of years. It's not easy. And I don't mean that like in one sense. I mean that in like every sense of the word, right? It's it's not easy, period.
No, it's not. I guess it just kind of falls back down to your work ethic. I line skid. I like what I do. I have done everything from down there to falling the trees, to setting the chokers, to running the machine, skidding the trees, to processing in them, to loading, to hauling, and I'm the mechanic. So, I've stepped in every set of shoes that there is there. And to me, it's kind of rewarding, for your hard work. There's days out there that you look up and you think, oh my Lord, what am I doing here today? And then pretty soon the sun breaks out. And I mean, you can't ask for better sunrises or sunsets out there in the woods. I've watched a lot of them, but slow down, pay attention to them. There's very few. You're out there with the wildlife. It's so rewarding to me to be able to get out there, the fresh air, the atmosphere, the smell of fresh cut trees is unreal. I mean, you talk about the best air freshener that there is that's what it is, besides link belt grease.
Right. Right. And Jody, a part of our goal here is not just the next generation. You and I have that, or that all three of us, we're always thinking about that next generation, next generation. Part of the reason that we started this podcast, and that Jared and I have hooked up for this, is giving advice to loggers that are out there. Maybe it's younger guys, maybe it's guys in the middle of their career, whatever that is. If you could think about, one or two things you wish you would have known 20 years earlier in your career that you could kind of pass forward, what would that be?
I don't think we have enough time. Uh,
Ah,
no, you just need to put your head down and keep going. At times you get slapped down so many times and so often, and it's just like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. But persevere, get up, keep pushing, because failure's not an option, period. And that's kind of one thing that Two Rivers Fred Gunther taught me. He said, you know he wanted the job that couldn't be done, and that's how I've kind of approached a lot of things. And so you learn a lot of different things as you go through life, and you apply them and this and that. But perseverance is huge. you know I mean, it's kind of like you put on your boots in the morning, and you pull hard and you break your boot strap, and you think, well, oh my gosh, how's this day going to go? What do? You reach down, tie a knot, thread it back through there, and away you go. You improvise on, keep moving. There's failure's not an option, I guess, is the biggest thing.
yeah, I love the movie Apollo 13. It's one of my favorites, right? And they get there, they're trying to calculate how to get the guys home after they go around the moon. And he goes up on the board and he looks at it and he just starts making the line. He's like, failure is not an option, right? The guys are going to die if we don't make this line get all the way in, right? Well, I think what you've created is you create your own niche in logging by having that mentality that you'll take the toughest job that's out there. and by having the mentality of we will find a way to do this job.
Yeah, exactly. Well, like I said, failure is not an option. I mean, you just, lead, follower, get out of my way.
Right.
So that resiliency is a really powerful skill to have, and that's amazing. Well, are there more, other soft skills that you find have been extremely valuable in your success besides resiliency?
To me, it all kind of falls all together, but the work ethic and the respect. You need to have that work ethic. It's like, you walk in there and it's just like, oh, that's not my job description. That's not my job description. Well, when you're a logger, your job description is pretty much everything that happens out there. You walk across the yard and you're looking at something, oh, well, pick it up and put it in the trash, or, oh, gee whiz, you walk here and, oh man, that's about ready to fall off, or that's broke. And, you're constantly looking around at things, and, yeah, there's a lot of different components that go to that, and it's hard to teach that. It's very hard to teach that without having the person right there at your hip pocket. I've walked up on my crew and I've been standing there looking at stuff, and I don't talk a lot when I'm there. If things are getting done with minimal damage, it's like, we're going all right. But I kind of point, well, geez, hey, you better look at that. That's about ready to fall off. Or, well, you got a loose bolt there. Well, this is here, that's there, that's there. Well, how do you notice that? I said, well, when I'm standing here, I'm not just staring off in space. I said, you're constantly looking. And kind of a side note there, my son, he'd watched me do that for years. And so he went on a couple years ago, he went on a side-by-side ride with my daughter's husband now, but it was a bachelor party or whatever. So they went up in the woods on side-by-sides, and he walked by a side-by-side and he could hear the air leaking out there. He said, well, somebody's getting a flat tire. And so, oh, geez, how can you hear that? He said, how can't you not hear that?
Right.
Well, gee, that's about ready to fall off under there. So he got it from me, but we pack a little 4-inch crescent wrench in our pocket, and he's out there fixing it, and these younger kids that are his age and a little older, they are just mesmerized of what he knows. I mean, stuff that's common knowledge to us there, but the normal person doesn't have it.
Yeah, I think that sort of speaks to a phenomenon we see here in Wisconsin too, with the fall of the family farms, right? Kids who are raised looking for that stuff, who are constantly problem solving, who are, they're breaking the tractor and they didn't want to get yelled at again, so they found ways to fix it as soon as they could. We don't have that population anymore. So trying to figure out how to communicate with the new generation who don't have that background puts a lot more strain on business owners to train that.
Mm-hmm. I sit on several workforce development committees, councils, whatever you want to call it there. But, we were going through some curriculum one day in a meeting, and I raised the question, and it was kind of like some hard skills, like maybe running a chainsaw or, doing different things like that. And I said, well, we need to build the work ethic back into this thing. Well, those are soft skills, I was told. And I'm like, you better make them hard skills, because if we don't do that, we're not going to have the other portion to follow it. Simple. I mean, it just, people nowadays, and I'm not saying everybody, but you run into it, but, people, they got a sniffle, or, they can't go to work because of this or that. The classic one I've heard is, my cat's having kittens, I can't come to work today.
You told me that one day, I was like, oh my hell. Oh.
Just crazy things like, it's kind of like every excuse not to go to work. And it's just like, well, how can you survive, especially with things the way that they cost now? I mean, the work ethic, let's get resilient and move forward, and come on, people, let's make things happen.
Jody, I think they're essential skills. I think people like to use hard and soft skills, and I think those are interchangeable for what they are. We know what a soft skill is. Okay, it's all the things that you're not actually doing, but that doesn't. I think we need a whole new category of essential skills, and I think some of those soft skills, especially for loggers, but in your profession, in the profession that we're talking about, they're essential skills. If you don't have them, you're pulling dead weight.
Exactly. We're back to the issues that the older generation, and I guess I'll just go through the generation deal, but the baby boomers, look what they went through to make things happen. The first part of my generation, what am I, Gen X?
I don't know, you're older than I am.
Well,
That's the
yeah.
generation.
Yeah, it's Gen X.
So, I feel the first portion of the Gen Xers still have some of that old baby boomer school in there.
Yeah.
Lead follower, get out of my way and let's get this thing done. And then somewhere in there halfway through there, I don't know where or how we lost it, but then because you look at the kids now that are coming up, and I mean there's no opportunities. We cannot have opportunities of the kids because it's too much risk or too much liability. Well, we can't keep them in a bubble wrap forever. We've got to have the blue collar workers. Everybody's preached college, 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 and look where we're at now. We have to get this work ethic turned around to where we've got some people that'll work and get something done. And my mission when I started when I started this thing and helping Blake, don't get me wrong, I'm still pushing the forestry too, but I'm more about the worker, whether it's a logger or whether it's a plumber or whether it's a mechanic or whether it's an electrician or whether it's, whatever it is, you have to have that work ethic. If you don't, and you don't implement it, we're in a world of hurt bad.
Jared, you can talk about this a little bit more than we can, but I would say pushing that work ethic is also a very, very good thing for a college kid.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Yeah, we talk about it as though it's just those kids coming out and doing the blue collar work, but having that outstanding work ethic translates, right?
I think the challenge here, and we can get into a real rabbit hole, but the current generations need a reason now for why they're going to work harder. And if they don't see a purpose and how they benefit from it, then they're not going to spend the time doing it. I've got an 8-year-old, and man, can I see that very prominently. So I think that the opportunities aren't there the way they used to be. We can't do things in schools like we used to. We can't do the job training like we used to because of the risk element to it in a lot of schools, not all of them, but in a lot of them. And with kids not growing up having to work every single day on the farm or whatever, yeah, you're going to see a different opinion in what work is.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the follow-up question again for you as a business owner, if you're looking at, do you risk hiring someone then that isn't going to work to your level, or is it better to just not have someone in that position at all?
Well, at this point in time, I mean, it depends on the individual. Over time, you can see whether that person's going to work or not going to work. And is it worth spending the time to train that person? And I hate to use that word because it sounds like you're circus animals, but to put forth your effort, what you're trying to do, because I can't tell you how many individuals and how many people in this valley here where I live have trained truck drivers, and I'm talking guys that are 80, pretty near 90 now, have trained truck drivers over the years to work for them, and then pretty soon they jump ship and they go somewhere else. I've trained, people to set chokers and try and do different things, and pretty soon, oh, well, so-and-so's paying 2 cents more an hour or however that goes. And away they go, pretty lucky now. I've got pretty loyal employees now, and they're darn good crew. I my hat's off to them, and I'm able to do a few more things, where I don't have to be there day in and day out. But yeah, it's that's a very tough deal because, how much expense do you want to put out and not get nothing in return?
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of like the new generation. What are you going to give me to work, or why should I work harder, and make more, do more? But to me, it falls back on a self-reflection of, when you work hard or when you sweat blood, sweat, and tears, and you turn around and look what you just got done doing, don't you feel a little bit better about yourself? Or if I work harder, by golly, I can make this job complete by sundown. But it's going to take me 2 or 3 more hours longer to get it done. But by golly, tomorrow I'll be able to do something different, or I'll be able to move on to something different. That's, what's that old saying? Don't put off tomorrow what you can do today. There's a lot of those old school sayings that are true that really need to come back around, and people need to think about things. And and I get, you can't work your life away either. I get that. I've watched that time and time again with people, but still, in order to survive and do anything, you need to work hard. And there's days that you're going to have to put in, I joke with people, I've found to cram 29 hours a day into 24. Then there's times like, okay, well, I got a little bit of downtime here. I can slack off a little bit and do something with the kids or the wife or whatever.
Support for this podcast comes from the Western Forestry and Conservation Association. For over 100 years, WFCA has delivered trusted forestry education, professional development, and workforce leadership across the region. Learn more at westernforestry.org. Jody, I'd like to not necessarily switch gears completely, but there's one question that this is a national podcast, right? So we're going to be reaching, Jared's in Wisconsin. We're in Idaho. There'll be people in Oregon. There'll be people in Alabama that are listening to this. I don't think everyone's had a chance to understand exactly what you're talking about when you're talking about the way you log. Would you kind of break that down for us a little bit and talk about your operation? Why is it a little bit different? What's your niche? Why do you keep going out there?
Well, I guess I'm still kind of the old school way of doing things. We have a hand faller. We are on, steep slope grounds, to where the tethering machines, it's too steep for them, too much rock bluffs type thing. And it depends on where you're at, what the prescription is. So I've got a hand sawyer that goes down there and falls the trees. And then, I've got a couple choker setters that pull the skyline down and hook it up to a stump, or if you got to hang a flat lip hook in a tree and then go back to get your deflection for your skyline. And then you've got the kick. Then it's a glorified crane is what it is. It's a 108 link belt made for line skidding. So then you hook your carriage on the line machine on the skyline, and then you've got your main line that runs through there. That's motorized carriage that'll clamp that carriage on wherever the guys want to on the line, and then it'll kick out the slack. So you got a motor in there that kicks the slack out from the carriage, so it pulls it from the machine to the carriage and then down. And then it's got a clamp for the main line as well, so you can pull it up however close to the carriage you want, run up the hill. So and then we swing it over into a landing, and then I got a processor that pulls those trees away and then processes them into a deck, and then you log loader puts them on the truck, and then you truck out of there. So it's all still the manual labor, other than the landing. The landing is evolved into the processor, which is good. It gets the limbs off, and the measurement stuff is all getting better and better every day. But now that they're pushing this tether system, moving into it, but there's a point in time to where the ground is too steep for a tether. I was on a job last winter where the rock bluffs were, there's no way they could have tethered that. So you're back to the old school logging, to where, line machine. And it's hard work. It's very hard work. You go down there and you're watering through the brush, and when I got people new that go down there in the woods, I tell them the best way I can explain this thing to you when you're down there setting chokers is, you better keep your eyes open and your head on a swivel, and pretend you're in a tank of rattlesnakes, because you're going to get bit. You just don't know how many times and when. And that's not a lie. You let your guard down one little time, and there's going to be a sweeper or something that comes back there and swats you, and you're going to think, wow, where'd that come from? I've been hit. It's not fun, but you've got to learn to anticipate those types of things. And granted, you're not going to catch them all the time. They're, especially in the wintertime, when there's 2 or 3 feet of snow on top of that stuff, and you're down there working, and you can't see what's underneath there, but you just do the best you can.
That sounds expensive as hell compared to the stuff we deal with here. How do you make ends meet?
Well, it's tough. It's tough. You've got to try and figure out, what your overall cost is for the day, with your machines and your expense and everything, and plug that into, okay, well, how many loads a day or how many tons a day am I going to produce? And so you try and get an overall average of, what you're going to do for the whole job, and then you work your numbers and hopefully they come out. But, there's days you might skid five, figured on a 5 load a day average. And, there's days you might skid one, you might skid two. At some point in time, you need to get, 7 or 8 or maybe even 9 loads a day to help that average, because it doesn't take much for the average to go down, but it takes a heck of a lot to get it to come up.
How many people do you have working on a single job then?
So what do I got? I got one, two, three, four, five, six, and then I have a contract truck. So, if you want to call him, that'd be 7.
Yeah, so you're looking at, doing 5 loads a day. Let's just say that's the average, right? You're doing 5 loads a day with 7 people, give or take. You got to bust your butt.
And I don't know how the rest of the world is. All I know is North Idaho here, because that's all I've ever been around. But we got this term, what do we call JIPO? A JIPO logger. You get paid for what you do. If you work harder and faster, you make more money. And that's been that way here for I don't know how long, and everybody's kind of going away from it because it's tough, especially getting paid by the ton. That was back in the day when they got paid by the scale or the piece, how many pieces a day you skidded. But there's so many variations. I still implement kind of the JIPO wage. I pay by the ton. So we got to move X amount of tons a day. If you guys bust your butt, you get your tons for the day, and you made your money. If you don't, that's kind of your fault. If you get there and you show up and you want to talk for an hour before you go down the hill or something like that. But it kind of an incentive type thing is, you get paid for what you do, and JIPO.
Dad's a Jippo. It's in the blood.
Well, exactly.
Yeah. Jody, maybe for everybody else too, where are you logging mostly? Like whose land ownerships? Because people that aren't in Idaho, they don't know.
So I do a lot of federal ground. So a lot of my job is in the Coeur d'Alene National Forest, which is north of I-90, just outside of Coeur d'Alene, just east of Coeur d'Alene there. I do a lot there. We're actually on the south side of the freeway now. That's it's federal ground, but we got this new thing there now that they're trying called the GNA. It's a Good Neighbor Authority. So it's Forest Service ground, but IDL, the Idaho Department of Lands, administers the sale. So it's supposed to be put in place to help get rid of some of the red tape, moving forward on selling the sales and that sort of thing. I can't remember how big a sale this is. I heard one just sold and it was like 16 million, which is an awful big sale. There's different prescriptions per different units on how they want it cut. They come up with a prescription, but yeah, so I do IDL ground, state of Idaho ground. I've been on some private pieces, but the most I do is federal or Forest Service ground.
I think that's just so unique to where we live. North Idaho and eastern Washington, the Colville National Forest, between that area, there's more federal timber moving than people understand. Like when people say, well, you can't do anything on the federal ground, we're doing it. We're doing it. You're a testament of that. You're doing it right now.
Since I went to work for Idaho Forest Group in 2009, I mean, for the most part, I've done federal ground. It's just that Coeur d'Alene National Forest. You could probably put all the loggers in North Idaho up that drainage, in different areas, and never cover it all in 20 years. There's so much ground up there. It's unreal. It's kind of scary, really.
Now, Jody, again, for people that maybe haven't been to Coeur d'Alene or up here, what's your species composition? And maybe a good, like, you started in 88, 89, 90, right? Officially.
No, it had to be after high school. I graduated in 90, so
Okay, 90. So species composition, but then the size of the logs, I think, is important to note, because what that's done is well, you can talk about that, but smaller logs, more pieces, more work, all that kind of thing. Talk about that a little bit.
And I'm just going to speak to the Coeur d'Alene National Forest because different areas up here are different. But the stuff that I do, it's a lot of white fir, red fir, cedar that we're in. Of course, the areas are going to depend on, dictate, how much what's there. But your DBH might be anywhere from 14, 16, we're getting into some oversized stuff now, and oversized up here is anything over 27 inch. So IFG likes 41-foot logs. So most of the timber, I'm not going to say all of it, but the majority of it is, 2.5 41. So you've got 82 and then a 20-foot 6, you're 100 plus tall trees, and then of course, depending on where the top breaks out and how it breaks out, but the timber is pretty tall. And that, I've had quite a learning experience coming from St. Mary's, which is south of Coeur d'Alene, to where the timber down there is just basically about a log and a half. So you figure a 35 and a 16. When I started working for them in 2009, I can't tell you how many decks I had crapped out because I was decking on trees, and then pretty soon you'd hear the deck crap out. And there's a lot of rock up in that Coeur d'Alene drainage, and that's why we're able to have our operation go when it's raining and when it's snowing, in kind of the wet time of year, because the rock is porous and the road holds you up and different things like that. So you can work a little bit more up there than you can anywhere else.
Yeah. So, Jared, compare that to your neck of the woods.
I can't give you precise measurements, but I know that we're not pulling very many 27-inch trees for DBH, that's for sure. I think
120-foot tall trees.
not really. No, not really. I mean, we get some good 60-footers, I mean, don't quote me on that, but yeah, some of the ones I've seen, good size, good 60. And not to mention that we do have topography. I mean, we have a mountain. Some people call it a hill, but it is labeled a mountain. So,
I've been to Minnesota one time, never Wisconsin. And when I was driving up to Duluth, when we first met, I'm driving up to Duluth. Yeah. There's about 3 inches of topography, as you're driving up there. I think I rose a little bit between Minneapolis and Duluth, right?
Okay. Duluth itself, that's got quite a bit of topography. You got to admit, there's a lot of roads that are pretty steep.
That's true.
And that's probably the best example of an extreme case in this area.
Jody, I make that joke just to kind of say it's so different, like the logging practices per state. And I'm not talking about practice rules or anything like that or BMPs, but just the fact of what you're talking about is slopes that where the landing's at, you're at, you might drop 1,000 feet in elevation, hanging out 4,000 feet, 5,000 feet, right? Maybe talk about that just a little bit, because I don't think people understand how steep you're actually talking about.
Back, I think IDL's got Idaho Department of Lands has a structure in their minimum safety book of their BMPs. They shouldn't be taking machines over, I believe it's 45% ground. And so, it was kind of redone, maybe provisions put into place for these tether machines. So, they're getting, 50, 60% there. I think, I've cat skidded 60% with a little John Deere 650, and boy, I'll tell you, it's a little nervous when you're going down the hill. Of course, you don't need any brakes, because if you have a big enough drag behind you, that's your brakes. But the wintertime, that's where you got to be careful, because if that thing starts taking off and sliding, those trees come underneath the cat, lift the tracks up off the ground, and away you go. Just hold on, Hail Mary, deerful. Here we go.
People don't understand. My grandpa started in the late 40s and logged all the way through, the 90s, the early 90s. And they used to use a D7, D8, whatever it was. They had 4 big chokers or 5 big chokers. They had a quarter load or more of logs coming down a 60 or 70% slope, and they'd just go clear to the top and then find a good place to turn around and then hook up, and then here they came, right? Those type of things, we're not doing that anymore.
No, well, it's the erosion control for one. When you've got those those big drags behind those cats, they're like that. Back when I started running a cat for a contractor here in town, I think it was 94. Anyway, we were working just out of St. Mary's here and up to St. Mary's River, and there was an old boy that was around there, and he talked about these skidding pans. And we're like, what are you talking about? He said back in the day, they had them, whether it was a D6 or a D8 skidding cat, but they didn't have any arches or anything on there. So they had what they called a skidding pan. So all the one end of the logs got into this pan, and they somehow tied the pan to the logs and then headed right straight down the bottom of the draw, the creeks, and right down to the river to a landing, just to kind of help keep from the erosion type thing. But so many things have evolved now to help for those types of situations and whatnot, to try and keep the erosion under control and all kinds of different things.
Jody, I think one of the questions that we had on our list of questions that I was supposed to send you and failed on, one of them was a misconception about loggers. And what you feel like is one of the misconceptions out there. I think you just answered that, but by all means, talk more about it. A lot of people have this misconception that the logger gets out there, cuts down the tree, throws it on, and they're running this, and they're trying to destroy that, and they're just trying to get a dollar. You just talked about the exact opposite of that. Would you expand on that, please?
We go to first aid training course every year. It's about a 4-hour training course. And then in this thing, we're kind of talked about the BMPs, the Best Management Practice Act for the state of Idaho. So that kind of tells you about, and that's a rule book that we have to follow. So, we really are looking at erosion control on the roads. Not muddy, not hauling when it's pouring down rain to where you got nothing but milkshake running down the road. We don't do that. Some of the places to where if you got water running down the road like that, and you've got a cross ditch that you getting the water off the road, we'll put straw bales there to catch the erosion, those types of things. It's been raining the last couple of days. Well, I went out and loaded yesterday morning real early before it rained, but today I didn't because it's been raining all night and all day. So I'm not going to go tear the road up. Just, it looks bad for us, but we are under so much scrutiny being the bad guy out in the woods that I guarantee you we are probably one of the most environmental people that are out there right now, period. I'll argue that with anybody, from the fire mitigation to being out there, lightning strikes, just everything about it out there. We're out there. We want the forest to be around as well. Some of the companies that you work for, dictate how your prescription's going to be, and we have no control over that. But so you got to do what you got to do because can't bite the hand that feeds you. But still, we're under a lot of scrutiny. And when the roads are built, they try and put what they call the brush and stuff for a filter windrow right underneath the cut slopes, so that catches all the sediment. We're not out there all the time rip, ram, and ruin by any means.
And Jared, I would say that that's a nationwide problem. There's a misconception out there.
Yes. And I'm trying to figure out where exactly that takes root, at what age, because it's prevalent, and trying to shine a light on that and show it as a misconception is definitely a goal and a struggle anytime that I'm dealing with students.
Yeah. For whatever reason, the loggers always catch the worst of it. I'm in favor of us thinning some more national forests around the whole United States. Like I've been through them, and I'm in favor of it. And every time I talk to somebody that's not in favor of it, which is fine, please, let's continue to have the conversation, right? Mm-hmm. But when I talk to somebody that's not in favor of it, they always point the finger at the logger. Well, loggers suck at this, and loggers, and it's like, why do we catch all the hell, right?
And I know why we catch hell, because when you log for the first little bit after we log and into the first fall and the summer there, that it's brown, it looks bad. I'm not going to lie. Yes, it does. But give it a little time, places to where, I'm not sure how you guys back there deal with your brush piles or that. So, but we're able to burn them out here and burn our strips, for the the understory. But anyway, once that stuff burns and gets rid of that, then the following year you start seeing the green, or maybe it's 2 years, but you start seeing the green buds come up through there, the grass. The best way I can explain that to you, Blake, is tell them is, okay, so you're familiar with the fires in the fire season, your June, July, August, September. Do you want that smoke all the time, or would you rather have a little bit of smoke in the spring or the fall, and then be able to, have your green, your vegetation come back like that? That's one thing that I don't know how we get across this, but like these fire lines, what they're building, and the Federal Forest Service, they won't let you go build a fire line. If they do, they've got to have it out there a mile ahead of you. Well, look how much timber that they burn in that mile. But get out there and build a fire line in front of that thing. I don't care whether it takes a mile fire line. You can plant that back with grass, vegetation, trees, whatever it is, and it's going to come back in a year or two. Or would you rather look at that burnt scar on the ground forever and ever and ever? Amen. That's the types of things that I think are being not publicized that well. Is, okay, if we log people, we can kind of keep from doing some of that stuff, but let us log, let us get in there and take care of the fire lines, and not sit down on your meeting until 10 o'clock and then, okay, well, then we can go out and fight fire when the pressures are just right and it takes off again. Get out there when it's daylight, when it's settled down, and then you can put that thing out.
Yeah, I think there's again, you said it, a misconception out there of what's best for the forest. And, I'm all for wilderness areas. Like, we're not talking about going in and logging a wilderness area or something like that. But there's a lot of acreage out there that needs a little bit of treatment. You just said it, there's the misconception. People think you're just a smash and grab, right? And here you're talking about like heavy details of a forest ecosystem and how to make it healthier.
The best way to me to explain a forest to an individual who's never had any experience around anything, are they familiar with a garden? That's all a forest is an oversized garden. If you go in there and you take the disease, the dying out, and let the young ones grow, and leave a few mature ones to throw good cones out, pine cones, Blake, pine cones.
That has context.
Yeah. Throw the cones out there, to get some good, healthy, good trees growing. It's a cycle. And so a garden's the same way. It's just all that forest is an oversized garden, period. And if you don't take care of it, you're going to have weeds or trees growing everywhere. I can't tell you around in St. Mary's here, I can take you anywhere here there is, and there's stinking trees growing up everywhere. I've out behind my shop there, I've got great big basalt rocks back in behind there, and they're growing up in between the rocks. It's just, if you don't take care of them, they'll take you over.
Jared, anything that we've missed? Like, this has been an awesome conversation, Jody. We super appreciate your time and
well, absolutely
appreciate your hard work. Like I said in the intro, Jody is not only just Jody Hendrickx of Hendrickx Logging, but sits on the ALC board as vice president, sits on the school board at St. Mary's, but you've also served as the president of the School Board Association for the state of Idaho.
Yeah, Idaho School Board Association, yes.
Yeah. And so Jody believes not only in good logging practices, but the next generation. And I just super appreciate it. Jared?
Yeah, I want to thank you for coming on. You brought up some really good points that I'm happy to hear and learn from, people like you to have a better understanding of your role in maintaining the sustainability of such a renewable resource that has so much value and so much use.
One thing I want to touch on, and something that doesn't get promoted in the state of Idaho very well, is that the Idaho Department of Lands has endowment lands, that certain portions of those endowment lands fund education. Not all the IDL lands fund education, but a certain portion of them do. So any state sales that are put up, on those endowment lands, that money comes back for public education in the state of Idaho. Last year, fiscal year 25, $63 million come from IDL, Idaho Department of Lands, into public education. Fiscal year 26, they've jumped it up to $68.2 million. And 27, $72.4 million is supposed to come to public education. And I've been preaching about that for 7 or 8 or 10 years now, trying to get the education to be able to collaborate with the loggers in the state of Idaho because it goes hand in hand. And so, I'm finally getting there. Our superintendent of public construction, Debbie Critchfield, is a phenomenal supporter of things like that. So yeah, I can't express that enough to our Idaho people.
I would go one step further and say, hey, it's not just, between 60 and 70 million. That's the actual cash money from the sales going into public education. It's also all the taxes.
Yep.
Right? All the loggers, all the log truck drivers, all the mills that process that wood pay taxes that go into public education. If you were to take that 63 million, 65 million, whatever it was, completely out and just shut off and go zero, it's not just that 60 million that you'd be losing, but you'd be losing all of the loggers and their taxes that they pay in those communities, the lumber mills, all of that. I don't think that gets talked about around the nation enough. Like, Idaho is trying to fund their schools by doing something, not by saying, give me, give me, give me. It's a phenomenal thing.
Something else too, a person I don't think realizes is the dollars that we spend into the economy are new dollars. They're not recycled. They're new. And that needs to be put out there too. Look how much revenue we generate into this system that's new dollars.
Yeah, that's a great point. Last thing, kind of in closing, if you could pick one thing about a new employee that you want them to have that you haven't necessarily talked about. So we talked about the soft skills. Is there anything that a new employee, I'm not saying a kid coming out of high school, right? They could be 35 years old, but a new employee, one skill that you would value more than anything else, if they had it on their resume or if they said it in an interview or whatever, one skill that you would value over anything else?
If they were good, loyalty.
Don't look at my resume. On that note, no, shoot.
Well, there again, if they're a good employee and you want to take the expense of training that person, and there should be some loyalty there.
100%. Jared, anything else?
No, I think that hits everything that was on our list.
This is Wood and Iron. We really respect and appreciate Jody for coming on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Wood and Iron, the podcast for loggers by loggers. Big thanks for joining us out here in the woods and the air today. We appreciate you making us part of your day.
And be sure to subscribe and share. And more importantly, send us questions and stories. We want to hear from the people who keep this industry running.
So until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and keep the woods working.
Wood and Iron is brought to you by the Wisconsin Forestry Center. The WFC is dedicated to promoting vibrant, sustainable forests and forest-based economies. Learn more at uwsp.edu/WFC. Special thanks to those that brought Wood and Iron from the studio to the cab. Editor Joe Rogers, producer Susan Barrett, and theme music by Paul Frater, Todd Hornick, and Sammy Mead.